Okay, the New York Post has this report. A prominent doctor and trans rights advocate admitted that she deliberately withheld publication of a $10 million taxpayer-funded study on the effect of puberty blockers on American children after finding no evidence that they improve patients' mental health. Dr. Joanna Olson-Kennedy told the New York Times that she believes the study would be weaponized by critics of transgender care for kids and that the research could one day be used in court to argue we shouldn't use blockers. Critics, including one of Olson-Kennedy's fellow researchers on the study, said the decision flies in the face of research standards and deprives the public of really important science in a field where Americans remain firmly divided. For the National Institutes of Health-funded study, researchers chose 95 kids who had an average age of 11 and gave them puberty-blocking drugs starting in 2015. The treatments are meant to delay the onset of bodily changes like the development of breasts or the deepening of the voice. After following up with the youths for 2 years, the treatments did not improve the state of their mental health, which Olson-Kennedy chalked up to the kids being in really good shape, both when they started and concluded the 2-year treatment. However, the Times pointed out her rosy assessment contradicts earlier data recorded by the researchers, which found around 1/4 of study participants were depressed or suicidal before receiving treatment. And it also doesn't make any sense anyway, because if you're telling us that these kids were in really good shape before they got the treatment, then why did they get the treatment? I mean, the whole argument, and it's a terrible argument, it's a fraudulent argument, as we see here, but the whole argument is that, well, you got to give the kids puberty blockers, and you have to sterilize and chemically castrate them, and sometimes even perform surgeries on them, and you have to do that because their mental health is in such a state that if you don't do that, it might kill them. And what they're really saying when they say, well, when they call it a life-saving treatment. I mean, Dr. Johanna Olson-Kennedy she'd be one of the first to say that these treatments are life-saving. And what does that mean? It means that, according to her, it prevents these kids from hurting themselves because that's the state of their mental health. So that's the argument. But now you turn around and say, well, yeah, but these kids in this study, they were all in perfectly good. They were all fine. They were all feeling great. Yeah, well, then then there's even less reason then. I mean, there's never a good reason. But now the only reason you even provide for doing these procedures, you've just admitted, you've just negated. It says the results also does not support the findings of a 2011 Dutch study, which is the primary scientific research cited by proponents of giving kids puberty blockers. That study of 70 kids found that children treated with puberty blockers reported better mental health and fewer behavioral and emotional problems. And yet this study contradicts that study, and so it was buried. Now, yesterday we talked about how we have won on the trans issue. Team Sanity won. And we won, I should say, politically, primarily. We won the issue politically. And we know that because the leader of the political opposition, the leader of the political movement that supports this stuff and promotes it, Kamala Harris, has waved the white flag. She's running from this issue as fast as she can. And in fact, most recently in an interview, she said that she'll follow the law on gender surgeries and gender procedures. Well, the law in many states now forbids these kinds of treatment for minors. So she's saying that she would follow that, which is, again, politically a total surrender. I don't know, if that's not a surrender, I don't know what is. But I also said that the political victory doesn't mean that the other side will just go away or give up. And even if the Democrats have surrendered politically, the fact is that many children are still in harm's way. Many are still being subjected to, quote unquote, gender affirmation indoctrination and medical abuse. So in that sense, in a very real sense, the fight very much continues, which we can see from this story. And this is what the other side is doing. The advocates for child abuse, sterilization, mutilation, this is what they're doing. If a study doesn't support their cause, they just bury it. And this is how science is so often done now, you should understand. So when someone says trust the science or they believe in science, this is what they mean. This is science to them. It means you go into something with an outcome already predetermined, and then you do your study and you run your experiments, and if it confirms the outcome that you already had in mind, then great. If it doesn't, then it doesn't count. That's science. And that's why you can always just ignore the left whenever they claim that the studies support whatever nonsense they're spewing. You can just ignore it. Like, it's at a point now where you should just ignore it out of it. Anytime somebody on the left cites a study, you should just ignore the study. Just, you don't have to even look at it. You can ignore it, because there's an established pattern for years now of this. Because you see what it means. It means that so when someone on the left says, oh, the studies support us, what they mean is that the studies that we allowed to be published and seen support us. Yet even then, if you actually look at the studies that were allowed to be published, that were allowed to see, in many cases they're still overstating the case. In many cases, even those studies don't really support them to the extent that they claim. So it's just lie upon lie upon lie. And when it comes to this subject, you don't need studies anyway. Basic common sense, basic human moral intuition should tell you that it's bad to sterilize and chemically castrate children. There should not be any studies on this, because a study on it requires you to do that to kids. So we'll do it to kids, and then we'll find out whether it helped them or not. That's morally reprehensible to begin with. I mean, kids are not lab rats. And again, basic common sense, basic moral intuition tells you that, yeah, sterilizing and chemically castrating children is bad. It's a bad thing to do. You don't need a study to tell you that. Just like you don't need a study to tell you that, like, murder and rape are wrong. Okay, you don't need a study for that. And why is it that puberty blockers don't improve mental health? Well, I probably don't need to explain that to this audience, but because I think you already know, but in case anyone's watching who might be confused on this point, just to elaborate a little bit, you cannot improve a child's mental health by giving them drugs that interfere with and stymie the normal and healthy growth and maturation of their bodies. Obviously. If a child is upset about the normal and healthy growth and maturation of their bodies, if they're experiencing poor mental health and blaming it on that, then the problem is their perception of themselves. It's their perception of their bodies. It's not their bodies. That's not the problem. The only way to truly improve their mental health is to help them to accept and love themselves for who they are, who they naturally, biologically are, which is the kind of thing. I mean, first of all, that's what affirmation. That's what affirmation should actually entail, because it is, affirming in a certain context is important, and it's important to affirm the truth. And it's important for you as an individual to affirm the reality of yourself, like whatever you are, the things about yourself that cannot be changed, the immutable characteristics that cannot be changed. It's important to affirm those. Now, if you don't affirm those, the reality, you can't change it. That's the point. It's why it's immutable. So it's not like your biological identity needs you to affirm it in order for it to be your biological identity. But no, if you want to be a mentally healthy person, then you need to affirm the things that are just simply true. You have to be willing to admit to yourself what is true about yourself. And that's the way you improve mental health. It's not by giving these drugs, obviously. There's also this, which kind of relates to the first headline. A trend here, as this article says, that I think a positive trend. Post-Millennial reports the Bishop Brady High School girls soccer team in Concord, New Hampshire, has joined the growing number of female athletes protesting the inclusion of biological males in female sports. On Friday, the team boycotted their scheduled match against Kearsarge Regional High School, which has a transgender identifying biological male on their roster. Kearsarge is one of the 2 schools in the state with a biological male on the girls' teams, despite the state having already passed a law designed to prevent such a thing from taking place. Kearsarge team includes Molly Jaquez, a nearly 6-foot-tall biological male who identifies as female. Despite New Hampshire's law barring transgender identifying individuals from competing in girls' sports, Jaquez has been allowed to play due to a federal judge's preliminary injunction issued in September. This ruling has allowed him to continue playing and using the girls' locker room until a final decision is made. So this other team has boycotted and said, well, we're not going to participate. We're not going to be a part of this charade. And as this article then goes on to outline, there have been other, a similar protests have been seen across the country, particularly in women's college volleyball. Schools such as Southern Utah, Boise State, University of Wyoming, Utah State, University of Nevada have seen players refuse to compete against San Jose State, which is a biological male on its women's volleyball team. This is a very positive trend. Another, yet more evidence of the great success that Team Sanity is having on this issue. It's not over because you still have these biological males. And it kind of shows you how, again, you can have the victory. Like they passed a law against this in New Hampshire. That's a political victory. And then the judges come in and you still have at least one male on the girls' team. So the fight continues. But this, as many of us have been saying for years now, we can put an end to men in women's sports, but the only way, the only way to finally end it, the only way to really purge this lunacy from the system completely is for the women to just refuse to be a part of it. To just say, this is not, the moment a male shows up to compete, this whole thing's a farce now. It's a charade. It's not what I signed up for. And I'm not going to take part in it. Because once the male shows up to compete in the volleyball match, let's say, it's not a volleyball match anymore. It's not what it is. It's a giant, charade meant to affirm. It's like this. Now it's a pageant, really. It's not a volleyball match anymore, as it would be if they were just women competing. And this is what all these women signed up for. Now it's a pageant meant to make this male athlete feel good about himself. And the only way to truly put an end to it is to have the women step up by sitting down and saying, I'm not getting up and taking part in this. We're seeing that more and more. And so I think that is, we're not quite at the end of this particular brand of lunacy with men competing against women, but we're getting there, which is a good sign. Hey, YouTube, thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like access to my full show with no ads, you should go to dailywire.com and use promo code Walsh to get 2 months free on all annual plans. See you there.